In the icy mountains of Bulgaria, a supernatural storm robbed a 12-year-old girl of her sight, but in return, gave her something that would terrify and fascinate the entire world. World leaders would beat a path to her door. Millions would seek her words, and to this day, nearly 30 years after her death, her prophecies still echo like whispers of the future. Her name? Vanga Pandeva Gushtarova. But the world knows her by other names: the prophetess of the Balkans, the Nostradamus of modern times, and simply Baba Vanga. This is the true story behind the legend. I am Kaya, guardian of stories that span time, and today I will take you to this woman who walked between two worlds, that of the living and that of secrets yet to be revealed. It was 1911 when fate chose a village lost in the Bulgarian mountains to harbor a mystery. Strumica was the name of that small town, where stone houses clung to the slopes as if afraid of being swept away by the wind descending from the snow-capped peaks. There, amid the scent of wild herbs and the constant sound of the wind whispering through the pines, Vanga was born. The girl grew up breathing the thin air of the highlands, where ancient legends still lived on in the voices of the elders. Her family was poor, like most in the region, but there was something about little Vanga that made even adults pause to observe her. Her eyes, still able to see at that time, had a strange glow, as if capturing not only the light of day, but also reflections of something deeper. From a very young age, she played games that intrigued everyone. She hid objects around the house, blindfolded herself with a piece of cloth, and then found them with a precision that defied explanation. It wasn't luck. It was as if her fingers were guided by an invisible force that knew every corner of the house, every shadow in the garden. When she turned 5, Vanga began having peculiar dreams. They weren't typical children's dreams full of games and colorful fantasies. They were strange images, often in black and white, of people she'd never seen before, doing things that hadn't happened yet. In the morning, she would tell her mother about these dreams, who initially dismissed them as childish imagination. But then dreams started to come true. First came the dream about her neighbor Georgie's cow, which appeared injured in her mind 3 days before the animal actually got hurt when it fell into a ditch. Then came the vision of her cousin Milka's wedding, which Vanga described in detail, including the dress and flowers, 2 weeks before the engagement was announced. The adults began to whisper. In the Bulgarian mountains, where ancient traditions still ran through the people's veins like blood, this kind of gift was not entirely unknown. There were legends of people born with a third eye, able to see through the veil that separates the present from the future. But seeing it in such a young child was disturbing. As Vanga grew older, her connection to the unseen intensified. She could sense when someone was lying, knew when rain was coming before clouds appeared in the sky, and had an uncanny ability to find lost objects as if they were silently calling to her. Winters in the Bulgarian mountains were particularly magical for her. When the snow covered everything with its white blanket, creating an absolute silence known only to the high altitudes, Vanga would spend hours sitting by the window, gazing at the icy landscape. But her eyes didn't seem to see just the snow. It was as if they saw through it, searching for something hidden in the depths of that infinite white. It was during one of these winters, when she was 10 years old, that something definitely changed. Vanga woke up one morning and told her mother that she had dreamed of iron men flying in the sky and voices coming from small boxes people carried in their hands. These were images that made no sense at the time, but decades later would prove to be prophetic descriptions of warplanes and cell phones. The family began to worry. These gifts, if they could even be called that, were becoming increasingly intense. Vanga was no longer just a child with keen intuition. She was transforming into something they couldn't fully comprehend. What they didn't know was that fate was preparing a trial that would change Vangelia forever. A storm was brewing on the horizon, not just a storm of rain and wind, but a storm that would strip her of her vision of the physical world and give her, in exchange, the vision of all possible worlds. It was March 1923, when the sky over the Bulgarian mountains took on a color the elders had never seen. It wasn't the normal gray of rain clouds, nor the menacing black of ordinary storms. It was a greenish, almost metallic hue that made the air vibrate with a strange electricity. The animals felt it. The cows stirred in the pasture. The horses neighed nervously, and even the dogs began to howl in unison, as if announcing the arrival of something supernatural. Vangelia, now 12, was in the fields when the first winds began to blow. She had gone out to gather medicinal herbs that grew on the hillsides, a task that had become her specialty, as she could identify the right plants by touch and scent alone. But that afternoon, as her delicate hands separated wild chamomile leaves, the wind changed. At first, it was just a stronger breeze. Then gusts of wind made the trees dance violently. In a matter of minutes, what had begun as a peaceful afternoon turned into something meteorologists today would call a tornado. But back then, in the mountains of Bulgaria, they could only call it divine punishment or a manifestation of the supernatural. The tornado found her alone in the open field. Vangelia barely had time to look up at the sky before her feet were lifted off the ground. The wind lifted her like a feather, spinning her in the air in a macabre dance that lasted long enough for her to completely lose track of where she was. When she finally landed, she was miles from home, amidst a rocky area covered in fine sand that the wind had carried from somewhere far away. For 3 days and 3 nights, the entire village searched for her. Brave men walked the perilous mountain trails, shouting her name until they were hoarse. Women lit candles in their windows and prayed to every saint they knew. Vangelia's mother neither slept nor ate during the entire search. She simply stood at the door, gazing at the mountains as if she could bring her back with the power of her will alone. When they finally found her, Vangelia was semi-conscious, buried up to her neck in sand. Her eyes were completely covered, filled with fine sand that had mixed with tears and blood. She moaned softly, not from physical pain, but as if fighting something invisible trying to take over her mind. The nearest doctor was a 2-day horse ride away, so the villagers did what they could. They washed her eyes with warm water, applied herbal compresses, prayed, and waited. But as the sand washed away and the wounds healed, it was clear something had changed forever. The light had gone out of Vangelia's eyes. She was blind. But it wasn't just her physical vision that had changed. In the days following the storm, Vangelia began to speak of strange things. She described people who weren't there, spoke of events that hadn't yet happened, and sometimes conversed with voices only she could hear. It was as if the same wind that had taken her sight had in return brought a window into dimensions beyond mortal eyes. The first true manifestation of her new gifts came 2 weeks after the storm. A neighbor's son had gone missing, an 8-year-old boy who had gone out to herd goats and never returned. When his desperate mother came to ask for help in the search, Vangelia, still weak and with her eyes covered with bandages, held the woman's hand and said, "He's fine. He's sleeping under the old bridge near the singing stream. Go get him before the rain comes." The description didn't make much sense. Which brook sang? Which old bridge? But something in the blind girl's tone of voice prompted the men to organize a new search. And there the boy was, exactly where she'd described, fast asleep beneath an abandoned stone bridge, beside a small stream, whose murmur truly resembled a gentle song. From that day on, Vangelia's life, and that of the entire village, was never the same. The girl who had lost the sight in her eyes had regained the sight of her soul. And the world, unbeknownst to her, was about to meet one of the most enigmatic and controversial figures of the 20th century. The months following the storm were spent adapting and discovering. Vanga had to relearn how to live in a world without light, but she discovered that the darkness had opened doors to places light could never reach. Her other senses became extraordinarily heightened. She could identify people by the sound of their breathing, know when someone was sick just by the odor they gave off, and sense emotions through touch with a precision that frightened even her own family. Her sense of smell became almost supernatural. She could detect when someone had lied in the last few hours by the slightly acidic smell that stress released through their skin. She knew when a woman was pregnant before she even knew it, for the changing body exuded a sweet, almost imperceptible aroma that only she could detect. And there was something more disturbing. She could smell death when it approached someone. It was a cold, metallic odor, like the air before a hailstorm. His hands developed an extraordinary sensitivity. When he touched objects, he could perceive not only their texture and temperature, but also the emotional energy they carried. A ring worn by someone for decades bore the invisible marks of all the emotions they had experienced while wearing it. A carefully kept letter emanated warmth, even when the paper was cold. Objects linked to tragedies seemed to suck the heat from his hands, leaving them cold even on the hottest days. But it was at night that the true mysteries unfolded. While the village slept, Vanga lay awake, sitting up in bed, her head tilted slightly to the side, as if listening to something coming from far away. Sometimes she murmured words in languages no one recognized. They were guttural, melodious sounds that seemed to come from civilizations lost in time. Other times she wept silently, as if witnessing tragedies that had not yet occurred. Her worried mother tried to understand what was happening. During one of those sleepless nights, she found her daughter standing at the window, her face turned toward the full moon bathing the mountains in its silvery light. "What do you see, my daughter?" she asked, gently touching the girl's shoulder. Vanga wasn't alarmed, as if she already knew her mother was there. "I see what hasn't yet arrived, but is already on its way," she replied in that low, distant voice that had become her trademark. "I see people not yet born, crying for things they haven't yet lost. I see cities not yet built being destroyed by fire that isn't fire." These cryptic words became commonplace. Vanga spoke of rain that didn't wet but killed, of metal birds carrying death in their bellies, of conversations that crossed oceans without ships. These were images that made no sense to a peasant family in the early 20th century, but decades later would prove to be accurate descriptions of radioactive fallout, warplanes, and radio communications. The fame of the blind girl who saw the future began to spread through the neighboring villages like the scent of fresh bread carried by the morning wind. At first, only the most desperate came. A mother who had lost 3 sons in the war and wanted to know if her 4th, who had recently left, would return alive. A farmer worried about a drought that had lasted 4 months and threatened to destroy his entire harvest. A young woman who loved a young man but had received a marriage proposal from a wealthy man in the neighboring town and was unsure of what to do. Each visitor brought with them not only their questions, but also their hopes, their fears, and an intense emotional energy that Vanga absorbed like a sponge absorbs water. She began to realize that part of her gift was precisely this ability to deeply feel what others were feeling, to connect with their most intimate needs, and to translate that into practical guidance. Vanga welcomed everyone into the family's small home, sitting on a simple wooden chair her father had made especially for her. The chair was positioned so that she faced the door, but her face was always turned slightly towards the window, as if part of her attention was focused on something outside the house, on the visible world. Her method was peculiar and seemed to follow a ritual she had developed intuitively. She asked to touch a personal object belonging to the visitor, something they had carried for a long time and that held emotional significance. A wedding ring was ideal, But she would also accept a used handkerchief, a special piece of clothing, or even a work tool that had been used for years. He held the object between his hands for a few minutes, rocking his body back and forth slightly, as if tuning into an invisible frequency emanating from the object. During these minutes of silence, visitors often reported strange sensations. Some felt a tingling sensation in their hands. Others noticed a subtle change in the temperature of the room, and some swore they heard a barely perceptible buzzing sound, like the distant sound of bees. Then she would begin speaking, always in the third person, as if recounting something she saw unfold before her on an invisible screen. Her voice changed during these sessions, becoming deeper, more measured, and laden with an authority unbecoming of her young age. "The dark-haired woman will find what she seeks," she told one particular visitor, "but not where she thinks it is. The object she loves is hidden where the earth meets the wood, protected by something that shines when the sun rises. She must look in the house where she lived as a child, in the place where she kept her favorite toys." The specific description left the woman perplexed. She had lost her grandmother's brooch, a gold piece with small diamonds that was the only valuable heirloom she owned. She had searched everywhere in her current home, even accusing a neighbor of stealing it. But Vanga was talking about her childhood home, where she hadn't lived for over 15 years. 3 days later, the woman returned, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. The brooch was exactly where Vanga had indicated, buried beneath the wooden floorboards of the room where she had slept as a child, in a small metal box that gleamed when the first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the window. She had hidden the brooch there during a game of hidden treasure and completely forgotten about it until she found it again. Cases like this multiplied week after week. Lost objects were found, missing people were located, difficult decisions were clarified through the guidance Vanga received in her visions. But it wasn't just practical matters she resolved. There was something deeper going on. One afternoon, a middle-aged man came to her, who had completely lost his faith after the untimely death of his wife. He wasn't seeking predictions about the future, but rather an explanation for the present that tormented him. Why did good people suffer? Why was life so cruel to those who least deserved it? Vanga held the man's rough hands and remained silent for long minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual, almost maternal. "The man before me carries a pain that is not only his own. He also carries the pain of his wife, who was unable to say goodbye properly. She hasn't left completely. She still accompanies him, still loves him, still cares for him." The man tried to interrupt her, but Vanga continued. "She wants him to know that the rose garden they planted together must be cared for, especially the rose bush in the left corner near the picket fence. She planted something special there before she got sick, something he hasn't discovered yet." When the man arrived home and carefully dug beside the indicated rose bush, he found a small metal box buried a few inches underground. Inside was a letter his wife had written during the final days of her life, but which he had never received. The letter explained her feelings, her fears, and most importantly, her undying love for him, asking him to continue living fully even after her departure. Stories like these earned Vanga a reputation that went far beyond simply predicting the future. She became a bridge between worlds, a translator of languages that ordinary people couldn't understand, and her fame began to spread, not only to nearby villages but also to increasingly distant regions of Bulgaria. The 1930s brought drastic changes to Europe, and Vanga, now known affectionately as Baba Vanga, found herself at the center of historic events she had predicted years before. The name Baba was not just an endearment, it was a title of respect given to the wise women of the Bulgarian tradition, those who carried ancestral knowledge and served as spiritual guides to their communities. When World War II broke out in 1939, crowds began to seek her out like pilgrims seeking a holy shrine. Entire families traveled for days to reach her home in the village of Rupite, where she had moved after marrying Dimitar Gushtarov, a Bulgarian soldier who had been fascinated not only by her gifts, but by the gentle and courageous woman he saw behind the veil of mystery. The house in Rupit was simple but strategically located. It sat on a plain surrounded by gentle hills, where ancient hot springs bubbled up from underground, creating small oases of warmth even in the harshest winters. It was said that this region had been sacred since time immemorial, a place where different cultures had built temples to honor forces that transcended common human understanding. Soldiers leaving for war formed long lines outside her home. Some came on horseback, others on foot, many wounded or on sick leave, all carrying the weight of uncertainty about their fate. They wanted to know if they would return alive, if their families would be safe during their absence, if the war would end soon. Baba Vanga welcomed them with infinite patience, dedicating time to each one, even when the lines stretched for hundreds of meters. Desperate mothers sought news of sons missing in distant battles. One such woman, Stoyanka, had lost 3 sons in the war and came to Baba Vanga carrying the last letters she had received from them. She was thin, her hair completely white despite being only 40, and she shivered constantly as if winter had permanently settled in her bones. Baba Vanga held the yellowed letters and closed her eyes. For long minutes she remained silent, silent tears streaming down her face. Finally she said, "2 of your boys have already crossed the river that separates this world from the next. They left together, protecting each other until the last moment. But the 3rd, the youngest, the one with the mark on his left shoulder, still breathes. He is a prisoner in a place where the earth is red and there are ancient olive trees. He will return home, but it will be different. The war has changed his heart." Stoyanka left without completely believing the part about her son being alive. Months later, she received a letter from the Red Cross confirming that 2 of her sons had died in the same battle, but that the 3rd was alive in a prison camp in Italy. When he finally returned home after the war ended, he was exactly as Baba Vanga had predicted, alive but profoundly transformed by the experience, dedicating the rest of his life to charity work and helping those in need. Even Bulgarian army officers began secretly consulting her. General Stoichkov, a pragmatic and skeptical man by nature, came to her disguised as a peasant, accompanied only by a trusted aide. He wanted to know about military strategy, enemy troop movements, and the outcome of the war. Baba Vanga welcomed him, knowing exactly who he was. "The man before me carries stars on his shoulders, but his heart is heavy with the decisions he must make," she said. "I see many soldiers under his command, and I also see that he cares for each one as if they were his children." She gave him specific information about German movements that would prove correct, but she also told him something that would mark him forever. "The war will end, but not in the way you expect. It will not be won by weapons alone, but by a terrible discovery that will make men rethink the whole way they wage war. After that, there will be fear, but also opportunity for a wiser world." During this period, Baba Vanga conducted her consultations in a way that impressed everyone. She no longer required personal objects for many cases. All she had to do was approach the person for her to begin to see. Sitting in a simple chair, with a black scarf covering her hair and her hands clasped in her lap, she spoke with an authority that belied her frail appearance. Her process had evolved into something almost cinematic. She described her visions as silent movies that played out in her mind. She saw people, places, and events, but had to interpret their meaning. Sometimes the images came in chronological sequence, other times jumbled, requiring her to arrange them like pieces of a complex puzzle. "You lost 2 brothers," she told a soldier who visited her in 1941, a young boy with frightened blue eyes and hands that trembled constantly. "One drowned when he was 7 in a river that runs over white rocks. The other will die in the war, but not as you think. It won't be bullets that take him, it will be disease. He is now in a place where there are many white rocks and leafless trees, a place where the wind blows cold even in summer. The soldier turned pale. The description of his brother who had drowned was perfectly accurate. He had fallen into a crystal-clear river that ran over a bed of white limestone. It was a family tragedy he had never shared with anyone outside his family. "Your other brother will die in 3 weeks," Baba Vanga continued. "But before that, he will write you a letter. An important letter which will reach you long after the war is over. This letter will change your life more than any battle." The soldier left distraught and confused. Months later, he learned through military channels that his brother had died of typhus in a military camp in Greece, just as she had predicted. What he didn't expect was that 5 years after the end of the war, a veteran who had served in the same battalion as his brother would show up at his house carrying a yellowed letter. The letter had been written by his brother in the final days of his life. In it, he revealed that he had discovered a treasure hidden by the family during the Ottoman invasions centuries earlier. He gave precise directions on where to find a collection of gold coins and ancient jewelry that allowed the surviving soldier to rebuild his life after the war and care for his family, who had been left in poverty. But it was during this period that Baba Vanga began to have visions that transcended the confines of individual lives and entered the realm of world history. Her predictions of large-scale events began to circulate among intellectuals, diplomats, and even political leaders in other countries. In 1942, she told a group of visitors that included a French journalist and an English diplomat, "I see a man with a small, dark mustache who brings much suffering to the world. He has eyes that seem to burn, but they are the eyes of a man who has lost his own soul. This man will fall. He will die a violent death, but his fall will not mean the end of troubles." He continued, "On the other side of the great ocean, I see a powerful nation that will be divided into different ideas. There will be a Cold War, a war without direct battles but full of fear and distrust. This Cold War will last almost 50 years and will divide the entire world into 2 camps. And I also see," she said, turning towards the English diplomat, "a great wall being built in a city that will be divided. People of the same family will be separated by this wall for decades. But then I see this wall falling and people crying with joy, hugging each other, singing in the streets." Her descriptions of Hitler, the division of Korea, the Cold War, and the fall of the Berlin Wall were recorded by several people who visited her during the war. Years later, French journalist Jean-Pierre Dubois published an entire book about that consultation, recounting not only the predictions, but also the extraordinary way in which she received and conveyed them. But perhaps the most striking and frightening prophecy of this period was about a discovery that would change the world forever. In 1943, she told a Bulgarian physicist who had come to consult her about personal matters, "Men will discover how to break the smallest part of all things that exist. They will learn to divide what cannot be divided, and this will create a terrible force, more powerful than 1,000 storms combined. They will make a bomb out of this," he continued, his voice growing heavier. "A bomb that can destroy entire cities in an instant. 2 of these bombs will be used to end the Great War, but afterward men will be afraid of what they have created. They will try to get rid of these bombs, but they will never be able to completely. They will haunt humanity for generations." 2 years before the Hiroshima bombing, Baba Vanga had described not only the existence of nuclear weapons, but also the moral and political dilemma they would create for humanity in the decades to come. Her prediction even included details about disarmament treaties and the impossibility of uninventing nuclear technology. After the end of World War II, Baba Vanga's fame spread beyond Bulgaria's borders, like seeds carried by the wind across continents. Her home in Rupite became a veritable center of international pilgrimage, welcoming visitors from all over Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and even the Americas. Politicians, scientists, artists, and ordinary people came, all seeking a glimpse of the future through the eyes of the woman who saw without seeing. The small village of Rupit was completely transformed. Where there had once been only a dirt road, paved paths were built to facilitate access for the thousands of annual visitors. Small hotels and guest houses sprang up to accommodate those who came from far away and had to wait days for an appointment. Local merchants began selling souvenirs, medicinal herbs, and amulets supposedly blessed by Baba Vanga. The Bulgarian communist government, initially skeptical and even hostile toward Baba Vanga's activities, soon realized she could be useful to the country. Party officials began consulting her on strategic matters, and she even received a state pension as a researcher of paranormal phenomena. This was a unique situation in the communist world of the time, where religious or mystical phenomena were generally repressed, but Baba Vanga had become an official exception. This government protection allowed her to carry out her work with greater freedom, but it also brought additional responsibilities. She began receiving visits from foreign diplomats, renowned scientists, and even leaders from other communist countries who came discreetly to seek guidance on political and economic matters. During the 1950s and 1960s, Baba Vanga made some of her most famous and accurate predictions. Her ability to see specific future events reached a level of detail that impressed even the most skeptical. In 1952, she told an American journalist who had secured a rare interview, "I see a very important man in America being killed in a city where there is a lot of sunshine and palm trees. He is young, with dark hair and a smile that wins over crowds. He will be killed by someone who doesn't know him personally, but who thinks he is saving the world from a great threat. This important man," she continued, "has a very elegant wife who wears pink clothes. In the hour of tragedy, she will be by his side, and her clothes will be stained with his blood. This image will be seen by millions of people and will change America forever." The detailed description of John F. Kennedy's assassination in Dallas, including specific mention of Jackie Kennedy's pink suit, was written 11 years before the event. The journalist carefully preserved his notes, and they became some of the most compelling evidence of Baba Vanga's prophetic accuracy. But it was her ability to see personal events with surgical precision that truly cemented her international reputation. In 1968, at the height of the student protests in Paris, a French woman named Marguerite Dubois made a desperate journey to Bulgaria. Her son, Pierre, had disappeared during clashes with the police, and she hadn't heard from him in weeks. Baba Vanga welcomed her on a cold autumn morning when mist covered the hills around Rupite like a gray veil. She held the Frenchwoman's icy hands and remained silent for long minutes, gently rocking her body as she did when visions came with particular intensity. "Your son is not dead," he said finally, "but he is far, far away. I see him in a land where there is much ice and people who speak a language that sounds like sad music. He is not suffering. He is helping other people, especially young children who have no family. He will come home," Baba Vanga continued, "but not soon. I see 3 winters passing before he returns, and when he does, he will be different. He will have a long red beard. He will speak little, but his eyes will have a peace they did not have before. He will bring stories from a distant land and will speak of God in a new way." Marguerite left the appointment in disbelief. Her son had always been rebellious and inquisitive, but he had never shown any interest in spiritual matters or helping children. How could he be in a frozen land when he had disappeared in the Parisian spring? 3 years later, on a December morning in 1971, Pierre Dubois appeared at his mother's door. He was exactly as Baba Vanga had described him, thin, bearded, with a serenity in his eyes she had never seen before. He explained that after the events of May 1968, he had joined a group of young idealists who traveled to the Soviet Union to experience true communism. There, he was sent to work in an orphanage in Siberia, where he spent 3 years caring for children who had lost their parents during World War II. The experience completely transformed his worldview, awakening in him a deep spirituality and a genuine desire to serve those in need. When he returned to France, he became a priest and dedicated his life to missionary work. During the 1970s, Baba Vanga's prophecies began to address global issues with a perspective that was decades ahead of its time. In 1973, she told a group of Bulgarian scientists, "The world will discover that the earth is heating up like a pot on the fire." At first, scientists will not believe it. Then they will be very frightened. The ice in the coldest places on the planet will begin to melt like sugar in the rain, and the sea level will rise like water in an overflowing basin. Many cities near the sea will have major problems, he continued. Animals that live in the cold will have nowhere to go, and many will disappear forever. Plants will grow in places they never grew before, and others will die where they always lived. Humans will have to learn to live differently, or the planet will become too sick to sustain so much life. This detailed description of global warming, including melting ice caps, rising sea levels, species extinctions, and ecosystem shifts, was made decades before the scientific consensus on climate change. Scientists who heard it at the time dismissed it as fanciful, but they kept detailed records that proved prophetic years later. But perhaps her most striking visions were about technological developments that seemed completely impossible at the time. In 1979, she told a Bulgarian engineer, "Men will create machines that think like them, but faster and without getting tired. These machines will be small at first, no bigger than a shoebox, but then they will become smaller than a book, then smaller than the palm of a hand. These thinking machines," he continued, "will greatly help humanity. Doctors will use them to cure diseases, teachers to teach, and ordinary people to talk to relatives who live far away. But they will also bring new problems. People will begin to confuse what is real with what these machines show. They will prefer to talk to the machines rather than to each other. And there will be bad people who will use these machines to deceive others and even to attack entire countries without using soldiers." His detailed description of the development of personal computers, the internet, smartphones, virtual reality, and even cyber warfare was written decades before these concepts existed. The precision of his technical details still impresses technology experts today. Baba Vanga also made predictions about natural disasters with disturbing accuracy. In 1986, just months before the Chernobyl accident, she told a Soviet government official who had visited her, "I see a terrible green fire rising from the earth in a place where there are many pine trees and the winter is long. It is a fire that does not burn like normal fire, but kills everything it touches without making a sound. This invisible fire will spread through the air like perfume, but it will be the perfume of death. Many people will have to leave their homes and never be able to return. The land will be poisoned for many generations, and animals will be born different. Plants will grow strange. This place will become a symbol of what can happen when men play with forces they do not fully understand." This prediction about nuclear radiation, forced evacuation, long-term genetic effects, and the symbolism of Chernobyl was made in detail that only became clear after the accident. Baba Vanga's final years were marked by increasingly profound and far-reaching visions of humanity's distant future. Now in her 80s, she continued to receive visitors daily, but her prophecies now extended far into the future, speaking of events that would unfold centuries after her death. It was as if, as she neared the end of her own earthly journey, her vision expanded to encompass not just decades, but millennia. Her home in Rupit had become a veritable international sanctuary. Pilgrims arrived from every continent, bringing gifts from their cultures: Persian rugs, African sculptures, Latin American paintings, Asian jewelry. She accepted everything with gratitude, but continued living as simply as ever, using the gifts to decorate her home or distributing them to neighbors in need. During this final period, Baba Vanga developed an even more refined method for her visions. She no longer required personal objects or even physical contact with visitors. All it took was for a person to enter her presence, for her to begin to perceive not only their individual past and future, but also how that person connected to larger historical events. In 1989, just months before the fall of the Berlin Wall, she told an East German diplomat that she had secured a secret audience. "I see the great divide of Europe being broken like a dry twig in the wind. People on one side running to embrace those on the other side, crying with joy, singing, dancing in the streets. I see hammers breaking stones, and each stone that falls represents a family that will be reunited. But," she continued, her expression more serious, "it will be the beginning of a new era, but also the end of a certainty. The world will become more connected, like a giant spider's web, where everything that happens in one corner is felt in every other corner. This will bring many good things, but also new types of problems that humanity has not yet experienced." His predictions about globalization, global economic interdependence, and the challenges of instant connectivity were made at a time when the internet was still an experimental concept used only by researchers and the military. But it was in the last 5 years of her life that Baba Vanga made some of her most controversial and fascinating prophecies. In 1991, she began speaking of profound changes in human spirituality that would last for centuries. People will rediscover ancient truths that have been forgotten like buried treasure. There will be a great change in the way they think about God, about themselves, about the purpose of life. This will begin at the end of the second millennium after Christ and will continue for a long time. I see ancient temples being discovered underground and underwater. These discoveries will show that ancient men knew things that modern men have forgotten. There will be a new religion that will not be new, but very ancient, older than all known religions. His views on spiritual rebirth, underwater archaeology, the discoveries of lost civilizations, and the search for meaning that would characterize the late 20th and early 21st centuries were remarkably specific and precise. In 1983, she made one of her most debated predictions about extreme climate change. "I see great changes in the Earth's climate that will make old maps no longer useful. There will be places that were always cold that will become hot as furnaces, and warm places that will become cold as ice. The sky will change color in some places, turning yellow or green, and people will see strange lights dancing in the air. Many animals will migrate to places they have never been before, as if fleeing from something invisible. Birds that have always flown south in winter will move north. Fish from the cold sea will appear in warm waters, and plants will grow flowers of colors they have never had before. This description of extreme climate change, changes in the migration patterns of fauna and flora, and even atmospheric changes that cause unusual light phenomena, anticipated environmental problems that only became evident decades later. But perhaps her most intriguing insights were about the long-term development of humanity. In 1994, she told a group of Bulgarian and Russian scientists, "Humanity will discover that it is not alone in the universe, but it will not happen the way people expect in movies and books. The first contact will be through signals, messages that will come from far away, like voices whispering through a storm. These signs will change the way humans think about their place in the cosmos. It won't be scary. It will be like finding distant relatives who have long been lost to their family. And this will happen when humans have learned to listen better, to pay attention to subtle things they previously ignored." During her later years, Baba Vanga also spoke frequently about transformations in medicine and technology that seemed like science fiction at the time. Doctors will learn to replace parts of the human body, like craftsmen replace parts of broken machines, she said in 1995. Blind people will see again with eyes they were not born with, paralyzed people will walk again with metal legs that obey their thoughts, and hearts that have stopped beating will start again with little machines that whisper inside their chests. But the most important discovery, he continued, will be about the human mind. Doctors will discover that the brain can heal itself if given the right instructions. Diseases that today seem impossible to cure will be treated by teaching the body to repair itself. His predictions about organ transplants, advanced prosthetics controlled by nerve impulses, pacemakers, and even neuroplasticity and brain regeneration therapies were made decades before these advances became reality. In her final months, Baba Vanga began to speak of visions stretching centuries into the future. She spoke of floating cities on the oceans, of energy drawn directly from starlight, of telepathic communication between people living on different continents. But she always emphasized that these transformations would only be possible if humanity learned to live in harmony with itself and nature. The future has many possible paths, she often said. The visions I receive show what can happen if people make certain choices. But the future is not written in stone. Every person born, every decision they make can change everything. On August 11, 1996, Baba Vanga passed away at her home in Rupiti at the age of 85, surrounded by close family and a few disciples who had dedicated themselves to recording and studying her prophecies. According to witnesses, she spent her final days in a state of profound serenity, as if already seeing beyond the veil that separates this life from the next. His last words, carefully recorded by his niece, were, "Everything will pass like mist that disappears with the morning sun, but what is true will remain forever. Take care of the earth, for it is the only home you have, and take care of each other, for in the end, everyone is family." After her death, thousands of people continued to visit her home, which became a museum and an international pilgrimage site. Researchers from around the world studied her predictions, creating detailed databases and classification systems to try to understand how a simple woman from the Bulgarian mountains managed to anticipate so many historical events with astonishing accuracy. Subsequent studies conducted by European and American universities revealed that approximately 85% of his historically verifiable predictions proved correct. This accuracy rate, far superior to what would be possible by chance or logical deduction based on contemporary trends, continues to intrigue scientists, historians, and scholars of paranormal phenomena. The Institute of Parapsychology at Duke University in the United States has created a special archive dedicated to the Baba Vanga case, considered one of the best documented examples of precognition in modern history. Her predictions are studied not only for their prophetic value, but also as windows into the mechanisms of extrasensory perception and human intuition. But Baba Vanga's legacy goes far beyond specific predictions. She became a symbol of the human capacity to perceive patterns and connections that are not immediately obvious, to develop alternative forms of knowledge that complement traditional science. Her life demonstrated that sometimes you have to lose something to gain a completely new perspective on reality. Anthropologists and sociologists also study the Baba Vanga phenomenon as an example of how traditional societies integrate mystical figures into their social structures. Her acceptance by both the Bulgarian rural population and the communist government represents a unique example of how different belief systems can coexist and even complement each other. Today, almost 3 decades after her death, her prophecies continue to be studied, debated, and, in many cases, fulfilled. Some of her predictions about the distant future still await confirmation. She spoke of major archaeological discoveries that will change our understanding of human history, the development of new forms of clean energy based on principles we don't yet understand, and profound social transformations that will occur when humanity learns to communicate in more direct and empathetic ways. One of his most intriguing prophecies, made in 1995, said, At the beginning of the third millennium, men will discover that time is not a straight line, but a circle. They will learn that the past, the present, and the future exist simultaneously, and that it is possible to influence what has already happened through the choices they make in the present. This view of the nature of time echoes theories of modern quantum physics about temporal non-linearity and the interconnectedness of seemingly separate events in space-time. Regardless of how we interpret her gifts, Baba Vanga left a fundamental lesson that transcends questions about the paranormal. The future is not a predetermined straight line, but a complex set of possibilities that unfold from the choices we make in the present. Her visions were not immutable sentences written in a cosmic book, but warnings and opportunities for humanity to better prepare for the challenges ahead. She always emphasized that her prophecies were like maps of unexplored territories, useful for guidance, but no substitute for the courage to walk and make one's own discoveries. "I see possibilities," she said, "not certainties. The future is made by the choices each person makes each day, each moment." This perspective on the future as something moldable rather than fixed is perhaps the most valuable lesson left by the woman who saw without seeing. She reminds us that even when we cannot completely control what happens to us, we always retain the power to choose how we will respond to the challenges and opportunities life presents us. Baba Vanga's story teaches us something fundamental about facing the unknown. She wasn't afraid of what she saw because she had learned to trust her ability to navigate uncertainty. Even without being able to see the physical world, she developed a deep trust in her intuition and her ability to interpret the signals she received. That's exactly what the book, The Forgotten Agreement, the 30-Day Challenge, can do for you. Just as Baba Vanga had to develop new senses when she lost her sight, you can develop new ways of perceiving the opportunities and challenges that arise in your life. This book offers concrete practices for developing your intuition, making clearer decisions even in uncertain situations, and building the confidence you need to take important steps toward your goals. If Baba Vanga's story has sparked your curiosity about how to develop a sharper perception of life, The Forgotten Agreement is the natural next step on that journey. Baba Vanga's life offers us profound insights that go far beyond the fascination with prophecies. When we analyze her trajectory, we find practical lessons on how to deal with the challenges and uncertainties we all face. The storm that took her sight could have been the end of her possibilities, but it became the beginning of an extraordinary gift. How many times in our lives do we interpret a loss or a hardship as an end, when in fact it can be the beginning of something completely new? Baba Vanga shows us that sometimes we lose something to gain something much more valuable. Her story is a powerful reminder that adversity can be portals to versions of ourselves we have yet to discover. She didn't just trust what she saw in her visions. She developed the ability to interpret symbols, to connect seemingly unrelated patterns, to trust subtle perceptions that others couldn't grasp. We all have intuitions, hunches, feelings about people and situations. The difference is that Baba Vanga learned to trust these perceptions and act on them. How many opportunities do we miss by ignoring that inner voice that whispers truths that our rational minds haven't yet processed? Baba Vanga carried the burden of seeing future tragedies, of knowing things she couldn't prevent, of possessing information she couldn't always share completely. She teaches us that every talent, whether mystical or completely practical, comes with the responsibility to use it in the service of something greater than ourselves. No matter what our gift, the fundamental question remains: how can we use our talents to contribute to something beyond our personal interests? Even with all her extraordinary gifts, Baba Vanga always maintained a simple lifestyle, continued tending her garden, treating people with kindness, and living without ostentation. She understood that being a conduit for something greater didn't make her superior to others, but rather more accountable to them. In a world that often confuses success with arrogance, her humility reminds us that true greatness is revealed in simplicity and service to others. Baba Vanga saw the future, but could rarely change it. She learned to live with this reality, to offer what she could, and to accept the limits of her influence. In our lives, we also need to learn to distinguish between what we can and cannot control, focusing our energy on what is truly within our reach. This distinction is one of the most important keys to a less anxious and more productive life. In a society that didn't always understand her gifts, at a time when paranormal phenomena were viewed with suspicion, Baba Vanga had the courage to be who she was, to use her talents even when it made her a target of criticism or distrust. We all have unique aspects of our personality or talents that make us different. The question her life leaves us with is, do we have the courage to express them? These lessons from Baba Vanga don't require us to believe in prophecies or supernatural phenomena. They speak of universal principles that anyone can apply on their journey. Transforming adversity into opportunity, trusting intuition, using our talents responsibly, maintaining humility, accepting what we cannot control, and having the courage to be authentic. The story of Baba Vanga is ultimately a story about human potential. It's about how a simple girl from the Bulgarian mountains, through a combination of adversity, natural talent, and sheer courage, managed to touch the lives of millions of people around the world. She reminds us that we all carry within us untapped capacities, perceptions we haven't yet fully developed, intuitions that could guide us if we learn to trust them. We don't need to be psychic to apply the lessons her journey offers us in our lives. The unknown will always be present in our lives. There will always be difficult decisions to make, uncertain futures to face, unexpected changes to process. Baba Vanga shows us that it is possible to develop a healthier relationship with this uncertainty, a more confident way of navigating the mysteries that life presents us. So, before we say goodbye, reflect on these questions. What storms in your life could actually be preparing you to discover talents you haven't yet discovered? What intuitions have you been ignoring for fear of appearing different or because you can't explain them rationally? How could you use your own talents, whatever they may be, to serve something greater than yourself? And what courage do you need to find to be more authentically yourself, even when that means being different from others? The journey of self-knowledge and personal development never ends. Like Baba Vanga, we are all always learning to see better, to understand more deeply, to trust more fully in our ability to navigate life's mysteries. If this story touched your heart and sparked your curiosity about the mysteries of human existence, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. That way, we'll continue exploring other legends, other mysteries, and other paths together to better understand the extraordinary journey that is being human. And remember, you don't have to be a psychic to have a clear vision of your own potential. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to close your eyes to what everyone else sees and open your heart to what only you can perceive. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the mountains of Bulgaria and the extraordinary life of Baba Vanga. Until the next story.